Namaste. You're listening to As Long as the River Flows, a Keepers of the Water podcast. This is the first installment of a special 4-part series about uranium. Canada's uranium mining takes place in Northern Saskatchewan on Treaty 8 and Treaty 10 territories, using vast amounts of water and contaminating mining sites and surrounding areas. In this episode, uranium mining and its impacts in Northern Saskatchewan and in our southern cousins territory, the Navajo Nation. First up, Candace Paul. She spent many years living and learning the traditional Northern culture, which she is passing on to the next generation. Candace co-founded Reclaiming Our Youth Homefront School, where she's worked with many students.
I think I'm going to just jump right into the reasons for why there has been Indigenous resistance to uranium mining. Initially, they knew about the black rock. They knew that it could make people sick. The warnings were there. They were told, don't touch it. It will make you sick. That knowledge was ignored. Initially, uranium mining started because in Canada, they have high-grade ore. And during the Manhattan Project, most of the uranium that came to the United States came from Deline in the Northwest Territories. Then during the Cold War, they started mining it on the northern shores of Lake Athabasca. So Uranium City became a boom town overnight. There was hospitals and theaters and schools, but they used the waste from the mining to gravel the streets. And it eventually started making people sick. And they didn't want to admit that, so they started to shut down Uranium City. It wasn't because there was a lack of uranium at Uranium City anymore. It was because they needed to disperse the population. People in Northern Saskatchewan, the Indigenous people in Northern Saskatchewan, had no say over the matter. It was the war effort. It was the Cold War. Governments went in and they decided all this. Only widows lived in Deline by that time because all the men passed away. All the men that worked and labored in the mines hauled the ore onto the barges and actually slept on the barges. All those men died horrific, painful deaths. Every time people stand up to trying to protect their lives, trying to protect their health, trying to protect their land, their water, they get government interference. So in 1980s, that interference was made into silence. They tried to silence people. But up in Wollaston, they made a blockade to stop the trucks. And they tried to use that time to share information, hand out pamphlets, so people would become aware, so the drivers would become aware. But that was one of the first resistances. Since that time, though, up here, it's been, they made their way in and they promised prosperity. There was big meetings where they promised the whole North prosperity. But the North never really saw that prosperity. They've been here for 60 years, 70 years. And the North has very few paved roads. It has very few business opportunities other than related to the mines. There's now, because of the closure at Uranium City, they decided that no further mines in Saskatchewan would have communities beside them. The miners are flown in and flown out. They spend 2 weeks in the mine, 2 weeks home. And for our northern communities and our northern peoples, this has been a problem because it's hard. It's having an impact on families. initially residential schools took children away from the parents, and now the parents are being taken away from their families for weeks on end. And so it has changed and affected how our communities operate and how our families operate. So the concerns for people's health have been grave. We are starting to see more and more and more health impacts. Back in 1999, there was a study done on a food chain. And it is obvious that the uranium mining has had an impact on the water and on the plants and on the air, because the animals are showing signs of radionuclides and heavy metals in their organs and in their meat. And back in 1999, they projected that this would begin to have impacts and cause cancers, like stomach cancers and that sort of thing. And we are starting to see those now. When we take this information to the nuclear regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, we're told our people die younger. Well, all of the old people from our communities are of the age of the late 80s, 90s, 100s. Our people did not die younger. In the past, they died of natural causes. It wasn't from cancers. Cancer is on the rise. Yet when we try to find information about that and what kinds of cancers, we're told only kind of cancer you need to worry about from mining is lung cancer. And a lot of your people smoke anyway, so we can't tell whether it's from smoking or from mining. So there's absolutely no compensation for miners. There's no compensation for our community members who are succumbing to these things. The uranium mining isn't just uranium mining. It's a whole nuclear fuel chain. So from here, the mills, grind it into yellow cake. And there's a lot of contamination from the mills. A mill spill that went through the floor of the molybdenum plant. So they put water on the floor so that they wouldn't have to worry about the radon gas when people went in to monitor the machines. When they went in and they noticed there was no water on the floor, it had all seeped through the floor, a concrete floor, which was porous. Then they realized that it had traveled 15 meters already into the groundwater, and the groundwater was contaminated. We weren't informed of this for 6 months, but they didn't put forth any plan for cleaning it up. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission does not regulate building standards at uranium mills. There was no response from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So these are the regulators who are supposed to be protecting us, protecting our lands, protecting our water. And they are not really concerned because, these guys are going to be gone in 40 years. So after that, it's our problem. We live here. What happens when that whole nuclear fuel chain, what comes out of the ground in Northern Saskatchewan is high-grade ore. Those rock tailings stay active until they bury them again. And they will continue to creep up to the surface over and over again. But down the chain, it's hauled away to places like Fort Hope, Blind River, and it's processed and made into nuclear fuel pellets. But they also process depleted uranium. And depleted uranium is used for what? It's used for nuclear weapons. So there's concerns about what this uranium is doing, not just in our backyard, in our home territories. It's what's happening to it down the line all over the world. And the standards that the Canadian government and the Saskatchewan government have are just, they're pitiful. And they are going to make the North into a sacrifice zone, even bigger than it was.
That was Candace Paul. Next, Leona Morgan. a Dene activist fighting nuclear colonialism since 2007. She speaks to the historical and current impacts and resistance in Dene territory and the Navajo Nation. She's co-founded the group Hallno and is currently working to shut down a uranium mine that just started near the Grand Canyon.
Oh yeah, hey everyone. Hello. She twitch eating a schlitz and albitni bushes chinky ani dash tohuglini dashanella. I am happy to be here. Right now I'm really focused on uranium mining at the Grand Canyon, but I did a lot of work in the past on ISL mining and then also consolidated interim storage of high-level radioactive waste from nuclear power plants. They estimate there's about 20,000 abandoned uranium mines in the country. Unfortunately, it's only the United States. So maybe there's a Canadian equivalent. Right now, I just want to talk about nuclear colonialism and settler colonialism. When we talk about land back and stuff like that, we have to understand the entire system we're living in. Neoliberalism or neocolonialism or just capitalism is based on this idea of ownership and, commodification of Mother Earth. They need resources. So they stole our land, they stole our resources and commodified them to do all kinds of stuff. And on Navajo, we consider our res like a resource colony because they mine coal, they mine, right now there's a lot of oil and gas development. Of course, uranium is what we're talking about. And then now they're talking about hydrogen and so-called, new energy, which is basically the same idea of extracting and contaminating our lands. Going back to the doctrine of discovery and legalizing the theft of our land, some other policies similar to that, such as mining law of 1872, and then other tools in the United States. I know in Canada, you guys also have a form of 1872 mining law, which makes it really hard to fight uranium mining. The Dawes Act, which was a law that kind of divided and conquered the land. And actually, this was back in the 19th century, but it's still really impacting us today with what's called allotments and allottees. So anyways, going forward from land ownership, theft of our land, and then today, in the United States, uranium, because of that 1872 mining law, that was to encourage manifest destiny. And so it left a lot of abandoned mines across the whole country. Actually, over 600,000 of various types of mines. For uranium mining, we're talking about, there's an estimate between 15,000 and 20,000. So on the Navajo Nation, this is one of the few places where they're doing cleanup of abandoned uranium mines. The US EPA estimates 523. Community people estimate a lot more. The reason they're called abandoned is because the mining that happened, the big uranium boom from the 1950s to the 70s, that was all mostly unregulated. So in the United States, we didn't have the Environmental Protection Agency until the 70s. And so there really were no laws telling the companies to clean up and to, clean up to this level or to make sure the groundwater is safe. And there is a very strong push from the federal government and internationally to mine uranium because people think that it's a clean form of energy. So there's a lot of propaganda out there, especially to some of our colleagues, like youth activists, climate activists. Some of them actually think this is a good idea to save the climate, but it's not. There's a strong push for new uranium because of this false notion that nuclear energy is clean or renewable or is going to save us from the climate disaster, which it is not. Different stages of nuclear energy development, and there's a place where nuclear energy and nuclear weapons split, but basically they both come from uranium and they both need nuclear reactors and a lot of the same stuff. So really, you can't separate nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. they take the uranium out of the ground through different processes. Going back to this nuclear fuel chain, starting with uranium and then all the different processing, and then ending up down here at the power plant, that each stage has, it produces a different type of radioactive waste. And most of it, we don't really have places to put it. And so a lot of it's sitting at the places where it was created. Some places, there's some radioactive waste dumps in different states. All of the stuff that happens in the front end, the transport of uranium. And this is international, this is global. This is not just happening in, they're not just taking uranium from here to there. It's going all over the world. And that's all fueled with fossil fuels and powered by, coal-fired power plants and different things like that. There's no nuclear power plant fueling this stuff, so it's all coming from other energy sources. And that's not counted when they say nuclear energy is carbon-free. And so they only count the carbon footprint here at the nuclear power plant, which mostly emits steam and, again, boiling water. So it's steam, radioactivity, and heat. They don't count all of the stuff before and all of the stuff after, which is not being funded to clean up. And then again, like I said, this waste down here needs to be kept safe forever, which is really, I don't know if that's even possible for us as humans, and of course would require a lot of energy as well. So that is conveniently not counted in the carbon footprint. So yeah, that's why nuclear energy is not going to save us from the climate disaster. It's too dirty, too dangerous, too slow, too expensive. Thank you so much.
To hear the full webinar and the full panel of speakers on nuclear mining, visit the Keepers of the Water Facebook or YouTube page. Miigwech.